Lisa Engelbert from NOFA-New York Certified Organic. We're an organic certification agency in Binghamton, New York. I am the certification program administrator at NOFA-New York. This is Erika Worden. She is the dairy certification coordinator. She works exclusively with dairy farms there, so she is the go-to person for dairy farms. She's the frontline person that you'll talk to when you call in. Today's presentation is going to be transitioning to organic dairy production. We're going to hold all questions until the end of the presentation, and then we'll have plenty of time to take your questions, okay? Today's presentation is going to cover an overview of the organic dairy certification process, the history of organic, history of the USDA National Organic Program, and a little bit of information about NOFA-New York. Lots of time for Q&A. So a little history about the organic program. Back in the early days, in the 80s and 90s, there were a lot of different certifiers certifying throughout the country. They all had really similar standards, but they all had little differences between standards as well. So it made it really difficult for farmers at that time. Because, for example, NOFA-New York might not recognize a certification decision made by another agency and vice versa. So it was really, really difficult. So there was some conversations starting to happen about forming a national program. There were a lot of pros and cons to it. It ended up happening. They passed the Organic Foods Production Act in 1990, and that was the beginning of the National Organic Program, working on the standards for the National Organic Program. The National Organic Program actually became official, and it went into effect in October of 2002, and that really created a level platform, a level playing field for all producers, because everybody would be certifying to a standard, a federal standard. The National Organic Program actually accredits certifiers like NOFA-New York to certify farms and processors as organic. You have to be accredited if you want to be working in the certification realm. There are 4 scopes: crops, livestock, wild crops, and processing handling. Processing handling is creating a product, like making cheese, making jam, jelly, breads. So they're the 4 scopes that you can certify as organic too. There are currently 64 domestic certifiers, and 23 of them are operating in New York State. So NOFA-New York is not the only agency in New York State. We're the largest, and I think the most experienced. We certainly know our state better than any of the others. So. There we go. So the roles of NOFA-New York. NOFA-New York has got 2 branches. It's got what we call the parent company. It's NOFA-New York, Inc. They are based in Rochester, New York. They do, whoops, sorry about that. They do a lot of education and advocacy work on behalf of farmers. They try to connect farmers and consumers. They do a food guide and marketing, help with marketing organic products. Put on a really wonderful annual conference. It's held in January every year, and it's been in Saratoga the last number of years. And a lot of field days. And we also have a technical assistance hotline. Information is there. The certification branch, as I mentioned, we simply do certification. We're a regulatory agency. Our office is in Binghamton, New York, which I say is down in the sunny south, which hasn't been so sunny lately. We verify compliance with the National Organic Program standards. That's our main focus. We work with farmers. We attend some of the field days, and we work with farmers to help, determine whether they're in compliance with the standards or not, and help them understand, what products are allowed, what methods, are in compliance. So that's just a map, and actually it's a little bit outdated. This was probably from a year or 2 ago, 18 months ago. that says we have 942 plus operations. This year, I think we're probably going to go over 1,100 certified operations. We certify primarily in New York State. We really want to stay in our own backyard because we know we can do a really good job in New York State. We do work in surrounding states just a little bit, but we don't try to get business in surrounding states. We really would prefer to stay right here in New York. It's a pretty interesting map, and it's fun each year to see this grow, you know, to see the dots fill in a little bit. It's pretty amazing. Benefits of organic certification. For organic dairy certification is you have a stable price for your milk. You know what you're going to get paid. You know, you're helping expand an important growing sustainable food movement, and it is growing. It continues to grow at 10 to 15% per year, which is, it's pretty amazing. It's been that way right along since the 90s. It helps you access markets. I mean, the other obvious things, you're helping preserve natural resources, you're taking care of the land. A lot of organic farming, you know, a lot of that money stays in your local communities. So that's great. I mean, conventional does too. That's not just organic farming. And there has been more access to funding for organic producers as well. So the milk market. As you know, right now, the milk market's a little bit depressed. We're hoping that's going to turn around. Not sure when. We don't really have any control over that. Our advice is make sure if you're going to transition to organic dairy production, make sure you've got a market before you go through the transition. Because, boy, you don't want to get to the end of that 1 year with all of that expense and effort and not have a market. It's pretty devastating if that happens. Organic certification does not necessarily guarantee a market for your milk. 5 years ago, I could say, you get certified, you pretty much will have a market. Right now, that's not the case. Hopefully that's going to turn around again. We've got a lot of information in our dairy brochure. It's available out at our table, or you can contact our office for that information and we can email it to you. Milk companies at one point were providing assistance with farms in transition. I'm not sure that that is still the case, but hopefully that'll turn around as well in the future. So who can use the term organic? Organic is what we call a mandatory voluntary standard. If nobody is going to force anybody to become certified organic, but if you want to market your products as organic, and you're over $5,000 a year in gross organic sales, you're required to be certified to do so. You've got to be certified to use 100% organic claim, the organic, which is at least 95% organic, or the made with organic claim, which is at least 70% organic. Exempt operations, as I mentioned, if you're not over $5,000 a year in gross organic sales, you're not required by federal law to be certified. However, you have to be following the NOP standards just the same as any organic farmer. You have to be willing to be audited. Your products, if you were selling like at your farm in a farm side stand, you could say it's organic if you're following the rule. You could not sell your products to another certified organic farmer for use on their farm, like for livestock feed or for use in a processed product. And there are fines if somebody is caught, you know, representing their product as organic and it doesn't truly qualify as organic. There are fines for that. It's $11,000 per sale, so it can really add up quickly. Just as an example, for a dairy farm, that'd be $11,000 every time that milk truck left your farm with a fraudulent load of milk. So they are starting to do that. So the annual certification process, a lot of people think it's really daunting. We were having a conversation with this gentleman earlier. The first year is always the most difficult. And it looks like a lot of paperwork when you get it, but if you break it down, a lot of the paperwork that you receive is actually guidance or sample maps or a sample of how to fill something out. You do have to fill out an application and pay a fee every year. You have to be inspected every year. So we'll go through what we do in the office to get you through the process. So you submit a complete application and whatever fees are associated with it. In the office, an initial review will take place. Somebody in the office that's trained to do this is going to review all of the information you send in to see if it looks like your farm or your organic system plan, your OSP is what we call it, is in compliance. Once we determine that it looks like you're in compliance or can be in compliance, we're going to send your file out to the inspector. We'll send you an initial review letter to let you know if there are any questions before that happens. If there are no questions, it's going to be sent out to the inspector. We do not schedule inspections. The inspectors schedule their own inspections. So once it goes out to the inspector, it's kind of on their schedule. They know if you're a new applicant, you take precedence over renewing applicants because renewing applicants are already certified. And that, so it's important to get the new guys through the process as quickly as possible. Once the inspector comes to your farm, they're going to look at pretty much everything you're doing. They're going to look at your organic system plan, your OSP, and they're going to compare that with what they see that you're doing on your farm. And they need to match. You need to be able to show them that you're actually implementing that OSP on the farm. They're going to look at all of your facilities. They're going to look at all of your livestock. They're going to look at every one of your fields. They're going to look at buffer zones where your land adjoins conventional land. They're going to look at your seed records. They're going to look at your planting, harvest, storage records. If you sell products or if you intend to sell products, they're going to look at your sales records. They're going to look at your entire system to make sure it looks like it's in compliance. They're also going to pay really close attention to any products that you may be using on your farm, whether it is a soil amendment, something you're adding to your land, to your soil, whether it is a product that you use on your livestock, whether it's a feed additive, a mineral formulation, a salt formulation. Every single product that you use needs to be approved through the office. It's not quite as daunting as it sounds. It's basically a quick phone call to the office. Most things we've already reviewed, and if not, we can take a look at them for you. So once the inspection happens, the inspector has a couple weeks to get that report written. He's going to send it back to the office. Then it's going to all be entered into our database, all of the information. It's going to go to a final reviewer. It's a different reviewer a different person than the one that did the initial review. And the final reviewer is going to look at everything that has happened so far. They're going to look at the initial review, they're going to look at the inspection report, and they're going to make a decision as to whether you're in compliance or not. And at that point, the decision to grant certification is made or to deny certification. If there are any questions, they're going to send a letter, and you've got a couple weeks to respond to that letter. So it's really not once you get through it once, it's really not a bad process. And as I said, the first year is always the most onerous because you're giving us all of your information all at once. Every year after that, all of the information is entered into the database, like all of your fields, all of the crops and the 3-year history on your field, we have that. You're not going to have to give that to us every year. You're going to have to just give us the next year's, the current information. And that's the same thing with most parts of the OSP as well. So, and then the cycle starts all over again. Every year you have to reapply, but like I said, most of that information is already printed off and you make changes to it at that point instead of filling it all out again. So inspection info, you are required to have an annual inspection. That's part of the organic rule. You may have unannounced inspections. We call them spot inspections. They can occur at any time. They may be focused on a very specific part of your farm. It may be we're going to look at feed records. Maybe we're going to be there in the middle of winter to see if you have adequate outdoor access for your animals. Sometimes they're complaint-based. If we receive a complaint against a farm, we do investigate them. Field inspections, if you happen to apply for your dairy transition in the fall or winter months, you're probably not going to have an inspection until the following spring. We can't really inspect snow-covered fields or fields where nothing is growing. It's pretty important to be doing inspections during the growing season. So we're going to, if that's the case, we're going to review your file and get it ready to go out to an inspector. And if it looks like you're in compliance, then, you know, we're going to hold on to it and send it out to an inspector in the spring. If it doesn't look like, you know, if it looks like something's not quite right, we're going to send you a letter with questions. So if you're applying January through October, an update application will be received in December and due at the end of February. So eventually you'll be on the same cycle as everybody else. Our renewal applications are always due the last day of February. We send them out in the middle of December, so you have a whole 2 months to get them done and in. Certification fees, the application packet is $50 plus tax. That's if you want a hard copy, if you want us to mail you a physical packet. You can get it free either by email, give us a call at the office, or you can get it right off our website. You can print it off yourself. So there are options to avoid that fee. The following fees are due at the time of application. The crop livestock certification fee starts at $650, and it's all based on your gross organic sales. And in your case, it would be projected gross organic sales your first year. There is a new applicant fee of $75. That covers all of the setup and entering all of your information into the computer. That's a one-time fee. That fee goes away the next year. And then the dairy transition monitoring fee is $100. And once again, that's a one-time fee as well. Our fees include the inspection. So it's kind of what you see is what you get. That could change in the future, but right now that is our structure. And it's worked pretty well over the years. Each subsequent year, your certification fee will be based on the prior year's certification or gross organic sales. It's all based on sales. Certification fees are reimbursable through New York Ag and Markets. There is a reimbursement program. It's called a cost share program. It's USDA money. In New York State, has historically been administered through New York Ag and Markets. The FSA offices are now involved with that as well, just starting this past year. So once you actually become certified organic, you can apply for cost share reimbursement, and they will reimburse 75% of your certification fee for each scope. So crop, livestock, whatever scopes you're certified for, we split the fee into those however many scopes you're certified for, and you're eligible for 75% of each scope back, up to a maximum of $750 per scope. So that's really a nice thing, you know, especially for beginning farmers. It's nice for renewing farmers too, as far as that goes. So we basically talked about that. The scopes are crops, livestock, handling, and wild crops. New applicants must be certified and paid in full by September 30th of each year to be eligible for the cost share reimbursement. And I believe we supply information about this with the packets that go out, so that you can always call the office if you have any questions. What is an organic system plan? An organic system plan, refer to it as an OSP from here out, it's a living document of everything you're doing on your farm, essentially. What we're going to look at your OSP for compliance. We're going to look at crop rotations. We're going to look at buffer zones. We're going to look at biological. How do you foster biodiversity on your farm and sustainability? How do you promote organic soil? Are you building soil structure? We're going to look at all of these things, encouraging ecological balance and biodiversity. Animal welfare and management is really, really important. We look really closely at that as well. that's kind of in a nutshell what an OSP is. There's really much more to it than that. So record keeping, what is an audit trail? We need to see the ability to track a product from origin to sale. Records need to be readily available at inspection. We do supply all necessary forms, but we do accept your forms too, as long as it has the information that we need and it's readily understandable on our end. Bear in mind that we do enter all of this into our database, so we've got to be able to sync that. And all organic producers have to keep their records for a minimum of 5 years. So what does that mean for a field crop person? You need to be able to look, we need to be able to see the audit trail from the seed, what field it was planted in, when it was harvested and how much, where that harvest was stored, and then where it was sold or if it's fed on your farm. And likewise, for a livestock farm, we're going to look at origin of livestock. Where was that, we'll say calf, where did that calf come from? Was it born on the farm? To what dam? What feed was it fed? When was it processed or slaughtered? Where was that meat stored? And then where was it sold? So that's what we're looking for really in an audit trail. Allowed and prohibited substances. This is one of the scariest, I think, parts of organic dairy certification for somebody making the switch from conventional to organic. What do I do if my cows get sick? And you know, there really are a lot of things that you can use. There's so many more things now than there were even 10 years ago, and certainly more than 20 years ago, because more companies are making some really good natural products. The national list of allowed and prohibited substances basically operates on the premise that all non-synthetic substances are allowed unless they're specifically prohibited, and all synthetic substances are prohibited unless they're specifically allowed. And it's a specific section of the rule for crops, and then there's a specific section for livestock and a specific section for processing. So prohibited, the big three, we call them, that are absolutely prohibited all the way through organic production. Genetic modification, any GMOs are prohibited. Sewage sludge, the use of sewage sludge on any fields is prohibited, and ionizing radiation is prohibited. There are just no questions about those. Any new products must be approved prior to use. And like I said earlier, just call the office. It's really a pretty simple process to find out if a product is allowed. Another possibility is using the OMRI list, the Organic Materials Review Institute list. They have a brand name product list. It's online, so that's another possibility. It'll be at the end, yeah. Organic seed requirements. Organic seeds are required to produce an organic crop. The exception to that is if you cannot find certified organic seeds in the quality, quantity, or variety that you need. At that point, you have to try at least 3 viable sources of organic seeds to find what you're looking for. If you can't find it, you can use untreated. It must be untreated, conventional, and they must be non-GMO. You're going to have that verification from the seed company if you use conventional seeds. Some of the other things on this slide don't really pertain as much to dairy and field crop. Inoculants must be non-GMO, and they need to be approved before you use them. So make sure, you know, if you're using inoculants on soybean seed or anything like that, or on stored crops that you're harvesting, make sure you check with us to make sure it's an allowed one, because believe it or not, there are some GMO bacteria inoculants on the market, and they would knock a crop out or a field out for 3 years. So, basic land requirements. We need a full 3-year history, the past 3 years, on any field that you're going to bring into organic certification. We want to see, you know, if it's been in grass for 3 years and nothing's been done to it, that's certainly simple. But if it's been reseeded, or if it's been a conventionally farmed field over the past few years, we're going to want to see what was done on it the last 3 years, and we're going to determine the date of a last prohibited substance. That's the date your transition, your 3-year transition on that field begins, okay? We're going to be looking at treated seeds, prohibited pelleted seeds, GMO seed, any kind of synthetic fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, anything like that, anything synthetic that's not on the national list would set a field out for 3 years. So that's what's going to start that transition date. For any rented or newly purchased land that you have not managed the last 3 years, we're going to need an affidavit from the prior owner or manager showing what has been done on that land the last 3 years. We're going to need a map of each field, and the map, it needs to include each field ID. You need to have an ID number for each field, and don't forget your pastures. One thing that we see a lot is people forget to consider their pastures as a field, but they're pretty important. So make sure you give them an ID number. We want to see the acreage of each field. They don't have to be to scale. If you draw it yourself, it doesn't have to be to scale. You can use FSA maps. We just need to be able to see how your farm is laid out, where the fields are, and the inspector is going to use these maps when he comes to do the inspection. We're going to want to see buffer zones. If there's a stream that goes through the middle of your farm, we're going to want to include that on your map. Any utility poles, roads, anything like that, anything, just include it on your map. You're going to want to establish buffer zones to prevent, spray drift or GMO pollen drift if you're adjoining any neighboring conventional farms or fields. Have to have a really good crop rotation. You can't plant corn, corn, corn. You need to have a break in there. If you have any questions about that, you certainly can call the office, and they can certainly help you with that as much as possible. Organic farmers are required to build and maintain soil structure, and that's part of the reason for the crop rotation, because monocropping is really, really hard on soil. And no treated lumber is allowed for any new installations, and that includes fence posts. So any fence posts that you have in prior are grandfathered in. If they've been put in the last 3 years, you may need to put some sort of a buffer in front of them just to keep the cows from having contact with them. Just need to have a plan, that's all. So rented land may be included in your OSP as long as you're the one managing the land and keeping the records. That's really important because this is all going to be under your organic system plan, okay? If some fields on your farm or rented fields are not eligible for certification when you apply, that's okay. We're going to look at the date that they'll become eligible, and they'll be listed as a transitional field until that time that they can be certified. Crops harvested from non-certified or transitional fields needs to be segregated and stored separately, and we're going to want to look at sales records or what you're doing with that feed. Harvest records have to be maintained for all certified and non-certified fields. Sales records are required if you're selling crops. If you're going to be feeding them on the farm, we're just going to need to do an in-out balance to make sure you've got enough feed for your animals. And crops cannot be retroactively certified. What that means is if you apply, for example, if we get your application in July, we're not going to be able to go back and retroactively certify any first crop hay that was harvested in May or June. But if you have your application in March and you're in process, then anything harvested after that point will be certifiable, assuming that the fields are eligible once you become certified. So that's a question this gentleman had earlier. So on your sample maps, going back to the map for a minute, make sure you use pen if you're drawing it yourself. So bear in mind that we scan everything that you send us, and we keep an electronic copy of it. Pencil does not scan well. It's muddy looking. Identify all your fields with the acres. Show the orientation of the map. That's really important. Let us know what way north is. Include all your borders, buffer zones, hedgerows, streams, ponds, power lines, roads, etc. Include your permanent fences, shade, water source in fields that are used for pasture. That's a new requirement since the pasture rule came into effect. As I mentioned, FSA and NRCS maps are acceptable as long as we can read them. They're so much better than they used to be. They used to be really muddy, but they're pretty good now. The recommended size is 8.5 by 11. That's so we can scan it easily. And we ask if your home farm is here and you have numerous locations away from your farm, give us an overview map that just gives us an idea where your fields are in relation to your home farm. It helps the inspectors too. And I just have a few examples here. This is a home farm map. This is a nice field map. It's pretty well defined. This is a farmstead map. This is showing their barns and the layout where everything is there. And there's an overview map, and as you can see, it's not to scale, but that just gives the inspector a really good idea where everything is. And it really helps people in the office. We don't have the privilege of visiting your farms very often. You know, the inspectors are the lucky ones. They get to come out and see you. We don't. We just look at you on paper. And this gives us an idea of what your farm is like and how it's laid out. So the dairy herd transition requirements, you must apply at the beginning of the 1-year transition. The date your application is received in the office is the date we consider your transition starting. By requiring you to apply at the beginning of your 1-year transition, it really helps identify any potential issues you may have. You don't want to get 2 months away from what you think is the end of your transition and have something identified that's going to knock you back 10 months. You know, so it's good to get that information right up front, and we take a look at it and determine, you know, that yes, indeed, your transition start date is such and such a date. During transition, all animals need to be managed 100% organically. All organic standards are required to be followed for the entire year. Healthcare products must be in compliance. That's where you call the office and make sure what you're using is in compliance. You have to be pasturing your cows. You have to be in compliance with all organic standards for the entire year. If you're planning to certify land and purchase organic cows, which is really common, we see that quite often, you have to have your land certified and have that certificate in place before the cows arrive. You have to have, ahead of time, an inspection for not only crops, which would, you know, all of your feed and your pasture land, but also for livestock. We have to be able to verify your housing, your pasture system, everything, you know, to do with the crops and livestock ahead of time. So if you have any questions about that, certainly let us know. Dairy herd transition is a one-time opportunity for an existing conventional dairy farm to convert their entire distinct herd to organic production. It's a one-time deal. All animals that you're going to transition need to be on the farm at the beginning of transition. So if you're thinking of doing this and you don't have the number of cows that you want, get them on your farm before you start transition, okay? Because once you start, you can't bring any more on. They have to be managed 100% organically for a full year before they're eligible to produce organic milk. They all have to have a permanent ID number, which is like an ear tag or a tattoo perhaps. Just a plain neck chain with a number isn't adequate because that's so easily moved from cow to cow. You need to maintain an animal list. When you first apply with us, you will send us an animal list that lists every animal, their birth date, if you know it. I mean, for the animals that are going to transition, it's not as critical as it will be for any that are added to your herd later. The breed, and we're going to keep track of the date that you start transition. And one thing that it's important to note, if you have a herd with docked tails, you can enter the transition program with cows with docked tails, but from the beginning of transition, You have to stop docking tails. It's prohibited. Okay? All of your land, or the majority of it, should be certifiable or entering its third year of transition when you begin your dairy certification or your dairy transition. T3, which is third year transition feed, is allowed to be fed to your cows during your transition year. T1 and T2 feed, transition 1, transition year 2, is considered conventional feed, so that cannot be fed. All T3 feed needs to be either fed up or removed from the farm prior to the end of your transition before we're going to issue a dairy certificate to you. Organic feed is required the full year. All purchased feed must be certified organic, so you're going to have to get invoices, you're going to have to keep them, and keep a copy of the organic certification certificate from anybody that you buy feed from. Calves must be fed whole organic milk. The only option, or the only alternative to that, there is a new product on the market. It's an organic milk replacer. For years and years there wasn't one, so you can feed an organic milk replacer. You can't use regular conventional milk replacer. And all feed supplements need to be from approved sources. So any kelp, any minerals, salts, anything like that. So livestock feed and pasturing, you have to manage them continuously on certified organic land. We recommend at least 3/4 of an acre per 1,000-pound cow for pasture. We realize that different farms are different, no two farms are the same. That's simply a recommendation. That is not a requirement. We're going to look at each farm individually for that. 100% certified organic feed required, or T3 feed during the transition year, just to reiterate that. So the NOP pasture rule for ruminants, you have to be providing at least 30% of their dry matter intake from pasture for the entire grazing season. It's not just a minimum of 120 days. It's a minimum of 30%. You should be shooting for more than that for at least 120 days a year. In New York State, most regions in New York can graze way longer than 120 days. There are exceptions. If, 2 years ago we had a horrible drought, obviously things that are out of the farmer's control, it would be a non-compliance. In 2016, I guess it was, the drought year, we actually went to the NOP on behalf of our producers and said, we're in the middle of a really bad drought. Many of our producers are not going to be able to meet the 30%, and it's not fair to penalize them for that. And they actually granted an exemption to certain counties. So that's the beauty of a regional certifier. We know what's going on in New York, and we really try to work on your behalf. We do have a grass-fed certification. I'm going to be talking about that in the next section if you're interested. So livestock living conditions and healthcare practices. Your housing needs to allow for the natural behavior of the animal. Direct access to sunlight, fresh air, year-round access. For all animals 6 months and over, for dairy animals, they have to have access to the outdoors. Dairy calves under 6 months old are not required to be on pasture. They're not required to be outside. They can be if that fits in your system, but there is that exemption up to 6 months of age for dairy calves. You want to strive for preventative animal husbandry, proactive versus reactive. Organic farmers tend to really need to be proactive and identify problems before they happen rather than reacting to problems after they've happened. There aren't a lot of things in our toolboxes that make that easy. Animal welfare is really important on organic farms. If you have an animal that you're treating with natural, non-synthetic things, herbal preparations, homeopathy, whatever, and it's not responding, and its life can be saved by giving it an antibiotic, you can't withhold treatment from an animal to maintain its organic status. You can't let it suffer. That would be a really major non-compliance. That said, if you do have to treat an animal that animal's going to need to leave the farm. You can't have a lactating organic animal and non-organic animal on the same farm. There's no way to really segregate that milk. Livestock living conditions. Housing needs to be appropriate to the species. Total confinement of any organic animal is prohibited. Organic animals need to have continuous outdoor access unless one of several exemptions apply, and they're all spelled out in the organic standards pretty clearly. Clean, dry bedding is required. If it's an agricultural product bedding, any straw, corn stalks, anything like that, hay, it's got to be a certified organic product. Wood shavings and sand are allowed. You have to make sure there's nothing added to them. They're not, the wood shavings aren't from treated wood or sawdust from treated wood. And no treated wood where animals have contact. If you do have treated wood in direct contact with animals, you probably will need to cover it with something, whether put a piece of wood over it, plastic, something. And treated wood can't come into contact with organic feed. So any feed bunks, anything like that, would not be able to have any treated wood in them. Organic healthcare practices, they're pretty straightforward. The prohibited ones, any antibiotics, hormones, pretty much anything synthetic is prohibited unless it's a specifically allowed thing on the national list. Any animal byproducts are prohibited to be fed. Parasiticides are prohibited across the board for slaughter stock. They're very limited for dairy, and we'll get to that in a minute. Tail docking is prohibited in cattle and pigs, very regulated in sheep. We already talked about milk replacer. It would have to be a certified organic milk replacer. Synthetic amino acids are prohibited. The only exception to that is methionine for poultry. It's not allowed in ruminant animals. Dehorning paste is prohibited. You have to dehorn as humanely as possible at as young an age as possible. It's recommended that you use some sort of an analgesic. Lidocaine and procaine are both allowed to be used for that. The allowed category, vaccines are allowed across the board. We need to make sure they're non-GMO. It wasn't a problem in the past. We're starting to see some GMO vaccines crop up on the market now. More in the poultry industry so far, but they're coming, I think, for the dairy industry too. Oxytocin, which is a hormone, is allowed, but it's only allowed for post-calving emergencies. It's not allowed for like routine milk letdown and things like that. There are other things you can use to help an animal along, like a new heifer with that. Some milk companies actually prohibit the use of oxytocin. I know Organic Valley doesn't allow its use at all. So you want to check with any milk company you're going to be dealing with to see what their policy is on that. Mineral and salt formulations, they can't include any prohibited ingredients. The most common ones that we see are mineral oil, which is used as a dust suppressant, yellow prussiate soda. It's a flowing agent. They're the two most common ones that we see. We do see artificial colors. They wouldn't be allowed in a feed supplement or a mineral formulation. Any agricultural products used in a mineral formulation or a feed additive have to be organic. Any carriers have to be organic. So, homeopathy and herbs are allowed. Herbs used for healthcare purposes do not have to be certified organic. Okay, a lot of people don't realize that. If you're feeding them and they're in a feed additive, they do. But if they're used as a healthcare product, which is used for a short period of time, they don't. FDA-approved vitamins and minerals are allowed. Once again, let us know what you're going to use before you use it, and we'll make sure it's okay. Parasiticides, ivermectin, moxidectin, and fenbendazole are allowed. Ivermectin is not going to be allowed probably after this year. I don't know that we have an actual date. That's coming off the national list. But moxidectin and fenbendazole will stay on the list. It's allowed for dairy only. There is currently a 90-day withhold of milk if you use it on a lactating animal. And if it's got to be used on the recommendation of a vet. you've got to try natural things first, natural remedies first. There's some pretty good ones on the market now. And if they're not effective and on the advice of your vet, written advice of your vet, then you can use one of these two, which are on the national list. I would probably start steering clear of ivermectin fairly soon because it is going to be removed from the list. We'll touch on organic meat requirements really quickly. This is if you're going to process an animal for meat. Livestock for meat has to be managed organically from the last third of gestation. So the last 3 months of the cow's pregnancy, she has to be on a certified organic farm, eating 100% certified organic feed, and managed 100% organically. It's easy if you're a certified organic farm, but if you're just getting started, those transitional animals, those animals that you're going to put through the 1-year transition, they won't qualify for organic slaughter, okay? Poultry, not that we're talking about poultry today, but for either meat or eggs, poultry has to be managed organically from the second day of life, once you get that baby chick on the farm through the mail. Animals can be sold by the whole, half, or quarter, retail cuts and processed goods. Meat may not be labeled or sold as organic if it's processed in a non-certified organic facility. Retail cuts, slaughterhouse has to be USDA inspected, and it has to be certified organic to be able to label your product as certified organic and sell it individually, like at a farmer's market or from your farm. Labels have to be approved by the certifier, and they also have to be approved through the USDA FSIS office as well ahead of time. And that's really about all I have. I love this cute little scarecrow. And there's some resource information for you. So, do you have questions?
I do. They're buffer zones.
Mm-hmm.
What does that require? Like if you say I have a field that borders woods and just on the other side of those woods is a conventional dairy farm, what does that mean? What if my land borders somebody that does do conventional farming and I want to do organic?
Okay, the question is about buffer zones. If you have a field that adjoins woods and on the other side of the woods is a conventional field, you're probably going to be okay. The woods are going to be considered your buffer zone at that point. Where we're really concerned with buffer zones is where you have a field right up to a conventional field. That's where we're going to be really concerned about it. And you're going to want to know, if possible, know what your neighbor's doing. Are they planting corn? Are they spraying a hayfield? Is it a pasture that they don't do anything to? I mean, they're all factors. And if you know that information, or you can get information from your neighbors, that's going to determine how wide that buffer is going to need to be. We recommend, when it's right up like this, a minimum of a 50-foot buffer zone. That's a recommendation. We can't tell you you have to do that. NOP doesn't allow us to do that, but we recommend a 50-foot in that case. If you have a field that adjoins a cornfield, but you've got a 25-foot thick hedgerow, that hedgerow is probably going to be okay, but we're going to look at prevailing winds. We're going to look at the layout of the land. We're going to look at what crop is being grown in both fields. So we'll help you as much as we can on that one, or if we can't answer it, we'll see if we can point you in the right direction to somebody that can.
I got a question.
Mm-hmm.
If you have pasture land and you have a couple family cows on there, and you don't plan on getting the cows certified and the pastures touching the field that you want certified, how does that play in?
The question is, if you have non-organic livestock on a certified field, does that affect the certification status of that field? No. You can have non-organic livestock on a certified field. That's really not an issue. Non-organic manure is allowed to be used as a soil input, so it's kind of a non-issue. If you're bringing in conventional manure, you're going to want to know what's in it. I mean, if nothing was added to it after it came out of the cow and became manure, you're okay. But if they added anything to it afterwards, you're going to want to know that before you put it on your land.
Question on the storage. If you had mentioned that you have to say like this crop came from this field, but if you're storing it in like a hay mow, and all the hay from all the fields are stored in the same mow, how do you, or to say the corn is all one in the same bin?
Well, what we see farmers doing is keeping track of the number of bales, whether large round, small square, big square, whatever, that you get per field. Same thing if you're doing haylage. If you're chopping haylage and putting it in a bunker silo, same thing. Keep track of how many tons you get off each field. We realize it's going to be commingled, but we're going to look at the entire system. If you have, to backspace a minute, if you have non-certified fields, you're going to want to make sure that you segregate that feed completely away from your organic feed. You do not want to store that anywhere near your organic feed, so there's no risk of commingling. Did you have another question?
Yes, so you said something about the different tiers, or like different sections if you got livestock, crops.
Mm-hmm.
If you are certified for organic livestock, how does that affect, like how does it work with your crops? Like say you're, does it all coincide with each other? I guess is what I'm asking. Like if you're certified organic for, say for instance, beef, does that also mean that what you're growing on your land is certified organic? If you decide to grow say a 2-acre strip of produce, is that considered certified organic?
The question is, I think, is everything on your farm going to be considered certified organic once you go through the process? If you include it in your organic system plan, yes. If you do not include it in your organic system plan, no. So if you want to include that 2-acre strip of produce, you want that to be certified organic, we're going to look at that as probably a separate field or a separate part of a field and make sure it qualifies just the same as all of your other land. Okay? Just because you have something on your farm doesn't make it automatically certified organic. It needs to be included in your organic system plan and verified at the inspection. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Just to add to that a little, but wouldn't it be a little bit hard on to have a dairy, certified dairy, if they crossed the fence and got on that conventional field and ate something? How?
The question was, if you have certified livestock that escapes and gets out of the fence and gets onto a neighboring conventional field, how does that affect their status? If it's an accident and it just happens for a brief period of time, it's really not going to affect their status. If it happens repeatedly, it could become an issue. We definitely want to prevent that if we can.
It happens.
It happens sometimes, for sure. You have anything else?
This really don't pertain, but when you said no docking of the tails, what is the, not that I'm docking tails, but why is that? I mean, why did they?
How does that benefit the cow?
I mean, I know, but I mean, what is there, just basically for the cow health?
Basically, it's an unnecessary altercation. The question was, why are you not allowed to dock tails? Not that he wants to dock tails, he just wants to know. It's an unnecessary alteration. It really is to benefit the farmer more than the cow. I mean, you take that cow's tail off, she has nothing to swat flies with. But you take that cow's tail off, that farmer might not have a nasty tail wrapped around his neck during milking time. So it doesn't benefit the cow at all.
Well, one thing you had brung out when I always thought of conventional farming was, you know, in the grain basically, or the product that they ate. But when I looked at your requirements of an organic dairy farm, it's way more than just a feed.
Oh yeah.
And I really appreciate that.
Yeah, the statement was he didn't realize how different organic farming really was from conventional farming. It's not just, organic farming is not just using organically approved inputs. It's a whole shift in production mindset. It really is. It's a totally different way to farm.
So the animals are taking more of a beating than I thought when you pointed out, like the docking of the tails. I'm glad that's been reinstated because I always thought it was humane for the cows, not to have protection of the flies.
Yeah.
But they're on the cord.
Yep. Is that all, you guys? You're easy. You're an easy crew.
How long does the inspection take roughly? I mean, granted on the scale of your farm.
Exactly.
But is that like
The question was, how long does the inspection take? It varies farm to farm. A big factor is going to be how prepared you are, how well organized your paperwork is, and everything. On our farm, it takes about 12 hours. But on Erika's farm, it probably takes 4, 5, 3. So it just depends on what you're doing, how many different aspects you're doing on your farm, how diversified you are. A simple vegetable farm could take a half an hour to an hour, but a really complex dairy farm that's doing a lot of other value-added things can take 12. It can take more. We've got a couple of farms that take a couple days. Number of fields that you have is a really big factor. Yep. So
My last question I have is, you say there's 60 different certifiers out there, roughly.
roughly.
What is the pros and cons? Why choose one or the other?
The question is, why choose one certifier over another? We like to say, NOFA-New York, we are very farmer friendly. We have farmers in the office. Like, I own and help operate an organic dairy farm, as does Erika. We have another dairy person in the office as well that grew up on a dairy farm. We have people with cropping experience, vegetable experience. We really have a lot of farming experience in our office. The other thing that's nice about NOFA-New York, in my opinion, is we don't certify nationwide. We certify in New York State and just a little bit in surrounding states. But like I said earlier, we want to stay in our own backyard because we know we can do a good job in New York State. We know what's going on in New York State. I have a hard time believing that a certifier from across the country would have understood the drought situation 2 years ago and gone to bat for producers here. I think that's a really big benefit. The other thing that I like to point out, and I've been with NOFA since 2002, and my husband and I have been certified since 1984, so we've seen the industry evolve through the NOP, and it's just really important for the integrity of the industry for a certifier to look at the intent of the rule in the Organic Foods Production Act, OFPA, and apply that. When you're applying the rule, think of what that intent was intended to be. And it's so important for the integrity of the industry to do that.
But now each one has to go by the same rules and regulations.
They do, but some certifiers see things a little bit differently. They may interpret part of the rule a little bit differently. Okay. So.
Now, when they have imported certifying, do they have to go by all the same standards that we do?
It's a good question. The question was, for imported organic products, do they have to be raised or grown to the same standards as something domestically produced? Yes, they're supposed to. There are agencies, US-based agencies that certify worldwide. We are not one of them. We don't want to be one of them. I don't know how you do that. There are foreign agencies that are accredited, around the world that are accredited to certify to the National Organic Program standards. They're all supposed to be following the same standards. We also have equivalency agreements with certain countries and certain provinces, if you will. Japan, the European Union, Canada, Mexico, and there's some other ones too. So.
For the consumer, it's safer to go with, say, a base like NOFA certified versus somebody that you don't even heard of, because the standards could be different, you're saying?
The standards should be the same. They may be interpreted differently.
Okay.
Yeah, the standards are a federal standard. They're supposed to be level across the board, but they're interpreted a little bit differently.
Well, I'm just saying like an imported product versus like say Organic Valley, you're a little safer to say organic's a true certified organic product versus something shipped in from China might not be.
Well, there have been some issues over the last couple of years with some fraudulent products coming in, and the National Organic Program is really trying to tighten up their ship a little bit. That's kind of on, you know, their turf. So.
Well, I appreciate the workshop. It was very good.
Well, we appreciate you guys coming. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact the office. Despite what you might hear out there, we're really pretty easy to get along with. Did you have another question?
So, okay, it says that you need to allow your animals access to the outside, to have the pasture and to wander, to be what an animal does. A cow grazes, so a cow needs to graze. You can't just be stuck in a freestall barn all the time. But are there, is there regulations on how you milk your cow? Can you still do a tie stall setup, or do you have to use a parlor? Is there regulations on that when you're doing?
The question is, are there regulations on how or where you milk your cows, whether it has to be a parlor, whether it has to be a tie stall, stanchion barn? No, there really aren't. The regulations are that your animals have to have outdoor access. They have to have access to the outdoors. If you read the standards literally, the standards pretty much say that your cows or your animals have to have continuous outdoor access anytime they're not being milked, unless one of the exemptions applies. The exemptions that we see the most commonly in New York State, okay, we're in the middle of winter, we have snowstorms, we have blizzards, we have ice storms, we have sub-zero temperatures in the North Country. Health and well-being of the animal is a really big one. That would be one of the exemptions, and that's one of the published exemptions. Damage to soil and water quality is another one. Those two are the main ones that we would see for a reason to keep an animal in or not give it, you know, full access all day long outdoors. Risk to soil and water quality is technically the verbiage. So, does that answer you?
Yes.
Kinda?
I was curious because I've visited several different organic dairies, and some people have different ways. One guy does a tie stall, another guy has a parlor, and I've worked on conventional dairy farms. So I've seen quite a bit of the different aspects of things. So I was just more of curiosity. I heard somewhere that they were doing away with allowing you to use a tie stall setup.
They are looking at that. They don't know. The National Organic Program is looking closely at tie stalls and stanchion barns because they're questioning how the animals can have continuous access to the outdoors when they're in a tie stall.
But you can have your cows trained to come in and out and go right to their stalls. They're a pretty smart animal.
As long as they're let back out.
Right.
Yeah, as long as they're not kept in. So. Well, if we're all done, I thank you very much for coming. And like I said, don't hesitate to call the office. Any dairy questions are going to go directly to Erika, and she knows which end of a cow is which. So she'll know what you're talking about. Thank you.